Hi, I'm Tom Stephenson. Welcome to Tools, Techniques, and Mental Models for Success series. In today's episode, we are going to be looking at Learn to Learn, something that is challenging for all of us. And surprisingly enough, there's not really that much that's discussed about how we can learn better, more effectively, and more productively. We're going to discuss 17 tips on learning, and I'm going to give you a little bit of a background on some of the different resources that you can look at. There's some pretty good resources out there, I find. You just have to know where to look. And if you don't know me already, my background is I'm a professor in the area of construction management. I teach at University of Toronto and George Brown College in Toronto as well, but I'm also a practitioner in the construction area. And I do a lot of consulting work with people from industry, and they're always wanting and needing and requiring to upgrade their skills and to become more effective and better. As we talked about in episode one of the series, actually episode two of the series, we talked about change and how rapidly things are changing. And when things change rapidly, it means we have to learn fairly rapidly as well. So why not learn more productively and more efficiently and enjoy the process? So there's really a number of things that we're going to be looking at. And just a little bit more about my background. I love to read, and I love to read in the areas of leadership, entrepreneurship, construction management, business management, and learning. And some of the things that I picked up on learning and sort of in the peripheral other related areas, because everything kind of connects in this world that I find. And so if we build little networks that we can make connections to all the little networks and nodes, then things start to light up in the brain, and we become all of a sudden much more effective and efficient at what we need to do. And we can resolve problems more easily, and we can be more creative in lots of ways. So one book that I've read that was exceptionally good was Peak and How to Master Almost Anything. And it's written by Dr. Anders Ericsson. And he's probably and Robert Poole, but Anders Ericsson is probably the leading researcher on mastery of particular areas. So he's studied people who have become the top in their fields, whether it's musicians or athletes or in their professions. He studied them. And it's a very good resource for you to check out. One of the things that he's really discovered is the aspect of deliberate practice, meaning that you need to focus, you need to challenge yourself to really sort of learn and retain the information and have it become second nature to you. And one of the things he says that it has to be kind of pushing you on the edge of your seat, more or less, this learning aspect. So if it's challenging, that can be a good thing. So if you're never really feeling any kind of challenge when you're learning, you're maybe not challenging yourself enough. And so he refers to this aspect of deliberate practice. You may have heard Malcolm Gladwell. He mentioned the 10,000 hour rule. 10,000 hours of deliberate, actually, Malcolm, I believe, just said 10,000 hours of practice. And Anders Ericsson, who he got the information, just wanted to clarify it's deliberate practice. So there's lots of people around you in your field, in the construction industry, in all kinds of industries. They've done whatever it is they do for more than 10,000 hours. But I wouldn't call them masters at it. Some people have spent 20,000 hours doing things, but they just done the same thing over and over again, and they didn't do it deliberately. Deliberately means that you are challenging yourself, you've got excellent coaching, you're receiving feedback, you're acting on that feedback, you're adjusting, and then you're trying again, and then you're getting coaching, and then you're getting feedback. So there's that loop of learning that's going in place. If you just go to a driving range and just hit golf balls and you're not getting any feedback, you might get better to a point, but then it tapers off, and then you don't really get much better after that. In fact, if you've got bad habits or bad routines, it probably reinforces those bad habits and bad routines and makes it more difficult later when you do get some effective coaching. So Some thoughts on learning means that you really have to focus, you really have to challenge yourself, and you have to look for feedback. That's why if you get feedback from a teacher, or you ask for feedback from a teacher, or in the case of the work world, you have a mentor, somebody that provides you with advice, that can be extremely helpful in helping you to be successful in your careers and advancing in many ways. So I keep that in the back of your minds when we're talking about this learning to learn. We'll dive into that more deeply in our series. Another excellent book is A Mind for Numbers. Barbara Oakley, she's written a couple of books in this area. One was more on career orientation, but A Mind for Numbers, excellent book on how to learn. And excellent, both Anders and Barbara, they have excellent YouTube videos on, so you can get a little bit of their background. But I would really mention the book as being really, really helpful. She's actually runs a course which is a MOOC. And if you haven't heard of a MOOC, MOOC, it means Massive Open Online Courses. And they're offered free. There's thousands of them. Great way to learn. So you can go to Coursera, you can download the app, and you can take certain courses for free. I believe the Learn to Learn course on Coursera is one of the most popular in the world. Millions of people have taken the course, and it's an excellent course on how to learn effectively. And Barbara, who struggled originally when she was a child, because she moved from place to place, wasn't very good at math, and she actually ended up becoming an engineer later in life because she learned to learn. And you don't, so this stigma that many people place on themselves, I'm no good at this or I'm no good at that, it can definitely be overcome. It's really sort of a mindset, and there's effective tools and techniques that you can use to better yourself that way. So definitely an excellent resource for you to look at. How We Learn, another excellent book that breaks things down into how you unlock the brain's potential, some of the different effective ways of learning. And you'll find that there's a lot of crossover between this book and the Barbara Oakley book that I mentioned. If I was going to choose one, I think I would probably choose the Mind for Numbers book, but I've really found this to be a really good read as well. It's very, very well written, and keeps you on your seat. So you look for those kind of materials from that perspective. The next book I would mention is in this area is Deep Work. Deep Work isn't so much on learning itself, it's more on trying to get focused and being able to do the hard work. And one of the problems that we have with learning is that we're not focused. We get distracted very easily. And as I may have mentioned in the other episodes, we get distracted all too easy with things like our cell phones and iPads. Every device is pinging us all the time, and it's a distraction. So Cal Newport has written this book, and he's also written another one. I believe it's called Digital Minimalism. And really, it's looking at trying to control the distractions so you can focus more deeply on what you're trying to do. If it's learning, you're focusing more deeply on learning. If it's complex problems, you're focusing more deeply on that. And I like his work because it really ties to my previous episode, which was on change, because the world is changing and things are simple jobs are being outsourced to artificial intelligence. So the more complex jobs are where there's going to be more value for longer periods of time. If you work in the construction sector like I do, then there's certain things that are fairly routine and there are certain things that are pretty complex. Estimating can be pretty complex. It requires your focus. Scheduling of projects and putting together schedules and coordinating that information can be pretty complex, and it requires your focus. But at the same time, there's some rudimentary things, firing off emails that are just answering simple sort of processes or questions that can be done pretty routinely. So what Cal says is you have to learn to be able to focus and do the deep work, estimating, schedules, those types of things really well. And if you do them really well, then you're going to be in demand. If you get this sort of superficial where you're trying to do 4 or 5 things at once without focusing deeply, you know what? You're going to make a lot of mistakes. If you make a lot of mistakes estimating and scheduling in the construction industry, you know what? You're not that valuable employee, and there's other employees that are more valuable. And so it's hard to retain your job. It's also hard to advance. So it's really good from that perspective. And if you need to learn new skills, it's much easier to do when you built that mindset where you know how to focus. And another in the series, we'll talk about meditation and mindfulness, and those things kind of feed into this element of being able to focus and to do deep work. So it's a good tool to keep in mind. So getting to our 17 learning tips, number one, test yourself often. I find it's very helpful if you're trying to learn some new skill, if it's something out of a book or something that you're learning, don't be afraid to test yourself. If there's questions that are available to help you, that's great. If you're studying for a PMP, Project Management Professional, the best courses, myself, I took a sabbatical and I'd never bothered to get the certification, but a couple of years ago I decided, I'm going to take a sabbatical. During the sabbatical, one of the things I'm going to do is do that. And so what I had to do was, and for me, it was a little bit tricky because that's what I teach is project management. But they have their own little ways of doing things, and you may have your own little way of doing things, and you have to learn their way if you want to pass the test. So I found it very helpful to get some learning materials that had online testing that I could practice. And practice I did, and I practiced on an ongoing basis. I didn't do it all at once. I did it over a period of time, and it was extremely helpful that way. I know because as well, I've written a couple of textbooks, Understanding Construction Drawings for Housing and Small Buildings, and Planning, Scheduling, and Control of Construction Projects. And in both books, I made sure there are lots and lots of questions because I know from experience that students just reading a book, it's not going to help. Students that are reading, understanding, trying questions, asking questions, reflecting, getting feedback, that's how you learn, and that's how you retain that information for longer periods of time. In training and development work that I do with clients, I also will have their employees do tests. And it's not so much even the test isn't so much I'm testing you to see what mark that you get. In those cases, it's not really about that. It's really about here's an hour, sit down and answer questions thoughtfully, reflect on what we've learned, do it a few days after we've done the material, go back over the material, and then it starts to stick. The more times that you do it and you're able to stop and reflect on it and think about it more deeply, the more likely you are to be able to think it through, to be able to apply it in different circumstances. I'm always looking for stickiness. What can stick with somebody over time? And if this material seems overwhelming, break it into chunks. Barbara Oakley likes to talk about chunks and neural pathways connecting. You have all these little chunks up there, and you may not know the big picture yet, but you're learning these little chunks, and then all of a sudden a light goes off, and the chunks start to connect, and everything starts to wire up in your brain, and you get clarity. Nothing's more fun and really satisfying than when the chunks start to connect and the neural pathways start to connect and they're starting to fire and you're starting to really get clarity on what you're learning. Usually, as Anders Ericsson would say, you go through some struggles to get there. But once those neurons start firing, then it's really a lot of fun when those pathways are built and the big picture starts to make sense. So that's really helpful from that perspective. Set time aside every day to study for, you want to find some quiet space. Some people, they find that they can work in an environment where it's kind of noisy and there's stuff going on, or they feel more alive when they're doing that. You know what? I'm a little bit like that. I've always done very well in a coffee shop. I could sit there. There's a little bit of background noise as long as it's just, some people talking in the background, that sort of thing, I'm fine with that. Other people, there's no way they can do that. They got to have silence and they got to be quiet. That's a very personal thing, but you figure out what works for you. And what you want to do is get some habits, routines, rituals, and they take time to build. The worst thing you can do is say, you put it off, you procrastinate, and let's say it was a PMP test or something. You're paying $500, $600 to take this test, and you leave it till the week before, and now you're cramming like crazy the week before. It's very stressful and hard to retain that information. You won't retain it after the test, so you might pass the test, but all that time wasn't well spent. As opposed to spreading it out, doing it every day over a long period of time, it's a big difference. And so if you build good learning habits, and you know what? In my mind, you should really have like a half an hour every day that you've set aside for learning. And it's reading new materials in your area of expertise. It's studying for some particular area that you want to advance in. It's reading up on different new innovations coming out. It's things of interest to you, but it's healthy learning. You set a time aside. It's going to become easy. It's second nature. For some people, it might be reading on the subway on the way to work. So every day they read there and they read on the way back, and they have particular things that they want to do. Over time, they will make great advances by building on that habit. Sounds like another good topic for the series is the habit building aspect. Number 6, when reading material, look away and try to recall important points about what you read. So you read it, and then you're trying to think about, what did I just read? What was that? And it's forcing your mind to dig back and read it. Because how often have we read 3 or 4 pages and then looked up and said, what did I just read? What was I? Your mind starts to wander, etc. But if you purposely stop every once in a while and you start thinking about, what did I read, and reflecting on it, and when it actually comes back to you, it will be retained much better. If you just read from start to finish and you never look at it back, and you don't force yourself to try to remember what it was, then it's not as good. It's a really good tip, is that aspect of reflective learning. It's a powerful tool for long-term retention of the material. Break your studying up. There's this timer called the Pomodoro timer. If you haven't heard it, look it up. Check out some YouTube videos on it. It is really a powerful tool. I found it very, very helpful. People can only focus for so long. I can tell you for sure, with over 25 years of experience teaching, I can tell you for sure, I see students, they can only focus on a topic for so long. Different students, different people, it might vary a little bit. Some people might be 20 minutes, some people might be 50 minutes, somewhere in that zone. What the Pomodoro timer innovator actually recommends is 25 minutes of focused study. So 25 minutes of focused study. That means not texting people in between, answering cell phone calls, checking your social media. No, it means total focus on that topic for, let's say, 25, 30 minutes. There's no police on this. And then take a break. And so the break amount, again, that can vary from 5 minutes to 7 minutes, but you take a break. And once you've taken the break, then you come back and you do another 25 minutes of focus time or 30 minutes of focus time, whatever is comfortable for you in that zone. It's good. It's healthy actually too for that break. You do something else, or you get up and you walk a little bit, or you get yourself a drink of water or what have you, because the mind still keeps working on whatever you were just doing. Even though you're doing something a little bit more light, it's still subconsciously working away on whatever it was that you're doing. You find that when you come back, you got a little bit of freshness in you, and a lot of those neural pathways, those chunks, they're starting to light up and connect. So when you're working on a very difficult problem, very often taking a short break will really help you to come back to that. And I don't mean take a break for a month. I mean, these short breaks like the Pomodoro timer will allow you to do. On my phone, I use one called the focus timer, and you just click on it and it will do 25, you can adjust it, or 30 minutes, and you can adjust the break time. And then like every fourth break, you can make longer. Instead of 5 minutes, you can make it 20 minutes. Though that can be very, very helpful tool for you. Some people think, oh, you shouldn't be taking a break. You should just hunger down and focus. But then you don't become as effective if you're there. It's kind of like cramming then. Then you're like there so long, you're getting worn out, you're not fresh, and your mind starts to wander. Don't cram. Athletes don't lay around and then train all day and the night before an event, and neither should you. Spread it out. Make sure you get a good night's sleep before any tests. You never see a Michael Jordan all of a sudden cramming to practice before an event. He's been practicing all along. He knows everything is in place. Everything is intuitive after spending thousands of hours practicing. He had a personal coach, Tim Grower, who basically he hired to give him extra practice and the practice through the off season to ensure that he was really good at what he did. So these are things that we need to keep in mind. Cramming is not the solution. Practice in a steady manner, planned, repetitive, habitual, makes it much easier to learn. So setting some time aside for yourself will pay dividends over the long haul. Whether you're a student, whether you're a professional, and you want to stay ahead in this industry, then those are good things to really think about developing, skills to develop. When practicing questions, alternate them. So I talked about coming up with questions. Don't always, if you're studying something like PMP Professional or CM Lean certification or LEAD certification, we've got all these different certifications and programs out there, especially in the construction industry. There's quite a few of them. What you want to do is practice questions and alternate them. Don't go all of them from each chapter in a row, because the test that you take won't be like that. They'll be scattered about the questions. So you got to be able to pick up and move and not necessarily fall in a linear form. Try to make sure that you're answering stuff the way that the questions will be asked in the test, but also just to be able to jump from one area to the other, just to make it easy and simple for yourself. So if you study in a non-linear format and you do that every night, you'll learn it much better, and it will be like how the test is laid out. So that ties into helping you to retain the information better. Also, nothing better than trying to explain something to somebody else. So trying to teach somebody else, that really forces you to think about it very, very hard. And it pulls that together. Any sort of doubt or areas that you're not sure about, it makes you look for clarity in those areas when you try to help or teach somebody else. And you should try to figure out, how can I say this simply without making it overcomplicated? Because if you can bring something that's complicated into its simplest form, that people can understand it, then you're going to understand it even better. So that is a very helpful tool to make the complex simple and for you to better communicate it. So 12 and 13 can really work together well. Try the most mentally taxing material first, as that's when your mind is most fresh. So if it's really mentally complex, start off with that. If you're already been doing this work for an hour and a half or 2 hours, and then you start the really complicated stuff, you're already tired, and it's harder that way. Because if you start off with it and you still have some problems, as I said earlier, Pomodoro technique, you take a few breaks, or you put something that's a little bit more simpler in there to mix it up. Then when you come back to it, then it's going to be easier because your subconscious has been working on it. If you find all of this too complicated or laborious, reframe it. And reframing is a great tool. We'll talk about that in another of our series, but reframing is really helpful. You're changing the way you look at it. So instead of just being stuck in the drudgery of this learning, if it's really getting to you, start picturing yourself and visualizing yourself being successful as a result of what this is going to do when you actually learn it. So you're looking at whatever this material is and how you can utilize it and advance your career. That can be very helpful motivational tool to motivate you intrinsically, because you're visualizing where you see your future going as a result of doing this extra work. And then the work becomes a journey, part of the process. And so it's not just the drudgery of it, it's a journey and part of the process to get to your final goals. And you start to enjoy it more. So it's that whole concept that is of learning into something that is challenging, that it's accomplishment, and that you can see where it will lead you when you succeed. And the last one, understand that the world, as I said in the second of the series, is changing at a faster rate than it ever has, and the ability to learn how to learn is the most important thing in your future that can really help you build to your success. As things change, what do you care? You can figure it out. You can learn it. It's not going to be that much of a problem. If you've learned how to learn. I think about students, a lot of the technical things that I teach them, fundamentals, they'll pretty much stay the same, but there's a lot of things on the peripheral. Maybe we're teaching them to use a particular software program of scheduling. Yeah, maybe that software program is going to be bye-bye in a couple of years. Something else is going to take it over. They shouldn't worry about it if they've learned how to learn. It's a software program. I'll figure it out. This is my process. This is what I do. And this is how I figure out software. Oh, I've got to go after a certification. I've done certifications before. This is my process. This is what I got to do. And I've got a system in place that I can follow that will lead me to success. So that system or process of learning how to learn with these tools can lead to long-term success in a very big way. So as the old saying goes, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. Student's not ready, teacher's not there. And Lady Luck smiles upon the prepared mind, so learn to learn. Thank you very much. I'm Tom Stephenson for this Learn to Learn in our Tools and Techniques and Mental Models series, and I hope to see you in future episodes, and please subscribe to my YouTube channel. We'll see you next time. Have a wonderful day.